dissociative disorders really show up something on the edge of human experience. Again, as Hollywood is interested in, but as an example of how much it could be on the edge of human experience and impact on someone's identity, one war veteran that I met early on and knew over a period of a couple of years, he had the most striking example of dissociation before he was admitted. What led him to be admitted to hospital is that he had found himself near Adelaide at a cemetery, and he was scrabbling at the ground. He was actually starting to dig at his father's grave, as though he was digging up his father's grave, and he felt like he was 8 years old at the time. He suddenly kind of becomes aware of himself, or comes to feeling 8 years old. He goes back to his car, and he could not drive off because he felt like he was 8 years old and didn't know how to drive. Now, that just struck me as so remarkable. It relates to something kind of like called translogic. Translogic in hypnosis means you believe something as though it's true, and then it impacts on your functioning in some way. So he felt as though he was 8 at the time, so like reliving a past memory, no doubt. And because he felt that he was 8, and he was telling himself he was 8, he had amnesia for how to drive, even though that's an implicit memory skill, and people often retain those skills with hypnosis. That shows how remarkable the phenomenon was. But afterwards, he'd actually been admitted to another hospital, and he described that he was paralysed. He could not walk for a period of time, but he explained to me that none of the staff believed that he couldn't walk. They thought he was putting it on. Now, if we go back 100 years to the time of Freud, when Freud talked about hysteria, they talked a lot about conversion disorders. Now, conversion disorders mean, for example, a person's blind, but there's nothing physically wrong with their sight, or they can't walk, or they're paralysed, but actually there's nothing in the functioning of their legs or whatever that says they shouldn't be able to walk. And so when they talked about hysteria a lot 100 years ago, that meant either conversion or also somaticization, so like pain in different parts of the body, and then dissociation, which is where we get the disconnection of cognitive and emotional functioning in some ways. So again, we go back to these recognised conditions. They recognised conversion disorder a lot 100 years ago, but they just didn't believe that this fellow had this problem, thought he was making it up, so he had to teach himself to walk again. And I think that again, just there's an issue around dignity and humanity. Like, what's happening if we don't believe what a client or a patient in a hospital says? I think we've got to have a really good reason not to believe someone, or at least consider what the person's saying to some extent at face value, and then try and find some truth behind that, because most people aren't going to be in hospital for the fun of it, trying to, lead the staff up a garden path. And I think that's the other thing that I learnt with dissociation. People would really keep their dissociative experience to themselves. And they would actually freak out if they thought that they might be suffering from something like multiple personality. That was part of the problem with the name, actually, because it made people feel even more freakily weird. I think dissociative identity disorder is a better name for it. But people were more fearful of having a dissociative condition than they were of being psychotic. And so, I think this gets at the importance of trying to appreciate people's experience and look at what language they use and what language that we use, and realise it's all difficult and it's all complicated, but try and come up with some kind of collaboration where we're working together, because this fellow often felt that people were working against him rather than with him.